I've got a sign here, webinar being recorded right in the middle of my screen. And when I go to share, it's full screen and I can't get rid of it. So here we go. We're back.
All right. Okay, wonderful. So I have 72 attendees so far. That's awesome. Folks. Hello, everybody. Okay, deal. Hello from Glendale, California, Washington, people from all over the place. Ooh, west of Scotland. Oh, it's Cameron. Cameron again. Joining us from Scotland. Armando, we'll go, oh, in Sydney, Australia. Appreciate you, Susan. Armando, we'll go ahead and get started here in just a minute.
Sure.
Yeah, all kinds of people chiming in. Ontario, Canada, Little Rock, so not too far. Oklahoma City. So yeah, I'll go ahead and get started here. My name is Tyler with Bedford Camera and Video, and we're glad to have you here. Armando has an excellent presentation set up for us. I'm really excited about this myself. I've been getting into this type of photography, so I'm excited to learn from what you've come up with over the years. So this is for those of you seeing this on Zoom. You will have the ability to put in your questions in the Q&A function. That's going to be a good way for us to facilitate, or keep it organized and make sure that we're answering all of those questions. The chat function is great, but they can get kind of lost in that chat log. So we do ask that you put it in the Q&A. For those of you that are seeing this not on Zoom, unfortunately, we will not be able to get any sort of interactivity from you. So maybe next time, join up through our Eventbrite page. Either through Eventbrite or on Facebook. That'll send you to the same place to sign that up. So I'm showing we have 103 participants so far. So that's excellent. That's amazing. So Armando, I'm going to let you take it from here.
All right, Sean, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Like Sean said, this type of photography I really enjoy because it slows me down a bit. It allows me to think about, what I really want to capture. So, let's go ahead and get started. So this webinar is, let's go to the botanical garden, or as I like to call it, a better guide to plant and flower photography. Now, during these times, as you might imagine, especially a few months ago, we had a very difficult time trying to get out there and create some content. So we were tasked with, going and creating new webinars during the lockdown. And it was rather difficult, I might say. But, the good thing about this type of photography is that you can find your subjects just about anywhere. Anyway, my name is Armando Flores. I'm a technical representative for Tamron USA, have been for about 7 years. Before Tamron, I did spend a few years at Sony. So I was there for about 5 years doing the tech rep and the sales combination at the same time. My territory was the Southwest territory. So I covered California, Nevada, Arizona, and Utah. As you can imagine, that is a great territory to have, especially for landscape photography. So you might think I did a lot of that type of photography. Well, not really. I did drive through those places, but didn't really have the time to stop and smell the roses, as they say. But with Tamron, they mandate that you do stop, take a day, and take images so that you can create some content. So I'm really grateful for that. Anyway, before Sony, I did spend some time at Nikon. I was a Nikon rep for about 22 years. So as you can see, I've been doing this for a little bit of time. So I've had the opportunity to do just about every type of photography that you can imagine. From portraiture to sports. In fact, I did sports for about 17 years. So boxing, football, baseball at the professional level. I did a lot of Hollywood stuff since I live in Los Angeles. So I did, the Oscars and the Golden Globes and anyway, so on and so forth. But uh, what I want to talk to you about today is this. How to take pictures of plants and flowers. So there are a few things that you need to consider, however. You know, um, you do need to know your location. Where are you going? What type of subjects are you going to encounter? That type of stuff. What to pack? What should I take? To go to wherever it is that I decided to go to. You are going to find some challenges, of course. Every type of photography is going to give you a challenge or two. This type of photography, quite a couple of common challenges that you'll find at every location, but we'll talk about those as well. And just like any type of photography, we are looking for the light, the good light, the better light. There is a thing that I like to do once I get to that location and I find that interesting subject. I like to, what I like to call it, working the scene. So working my subject, trying to get a better image than I can see. Another thing is that, it's all about having fun and trying new things. So why go to a botanical garden? And, like I mentioned, during these trying times, it is a good place to go out and practice and, keep your, keep you sharp. Um, it's a great place to, try all sorts of different types of photography. Whether you go to a, public park, a real botanical garden, or even your neighbor's backyard. It's once again great opportunity to shoot different types of subject to keep you going. So once again, great place to practice because it allows you to slow down. You're not in a hurry. You're not in a rush. You're there by yourself, hopefully, or maybe a couple other people, but you've got a good time to just kind of think about the subject and what it is that you want to capture. Now, practice, as you know, will get you comfortable with your equipment. And when you get comfortable with your equipment, you build confidence. And that allows you to get better and hone in your photography skills. Great opportunity to, once again, practice all sorts of photography. You could shoot landscapes there, nature, some still life, yes, some bird photography, and even macro. I happen to do a lot of macro when I'm at these locations because the subjects, in my opinion, look better when you're up close and personal with them. So I like to always take lenses that enable me to focus close. The closer you can get to your subject, the larger your subject is going to appear. And that in itself brings a few challenges as well. You're going to see some information at the bottom of the screen telling you what lens was used. You're going to see the exposure information. I will tell you one thing. Let's not get too hung up on the exposure because the exposure is good and correct for that particular spot at that particular point in time. It doesn't mean that you're not going to use those numbers again. Sure you are. But it's more about why you used a certain aperture, why you used a certain shutter speed. That's more important than, exactly what all the numbers were. So once again, you'll see that information there, and you'll see the lenses that we use to take that particular picture. Let me clarify a couple of those things because the information on the lens tells you what type of camera that lens was designed for, excuse me. Now, if you're using a full frame camera, different manufacturers call them, have a different designation to them. It's either FX or DX or EF or EFS, so on and so forth. So we have that type of designation too. And a DI lens is a lens designed for full frame DSLR style cameras. A DI2 is a lens designed for crop sensor DSLR cameras. And a DI3 is for mirrorless cameras. And as you know, there are a whole slew of different mirrorless cameras out there. So you have to take a look at that specific lens to see what type of mirrorless camera that lens was designed for. And so anyway, once again, let's go ahead and talk about the exposure. And what I mean by that is think about what it is that you want to accomplish with that image. And that's the most important thing. So you get started with that particular setting. Now, for close-up photography like this type of image, I'm more concerned of what part or how much of my subject is in focus. So my first setting is going to be my aperture, because that is what controls the depth of field. And the depth of field is how much, again, or what part of your subject is in focus. So if you want a lot of your subject to be in focus, you need a very small opening, because a small opening gives you a large depth of field. A large opening gives you a shallower depth of field. But there are other factors that contribute or control depth of field, and it's important to know what those are so that we can use them to our advantage. So the next thing that controls or contributes to depth of field is going to be the focal length. What lens are you using? If you're using a wide angle lens, you're going to have more inherent depth of field built into that lens to begin with. So now you're going to have to think about, is that too much? Do I have to control that? And you know how you control that. You open it up and now your depth of field diminishes. The other factor is going to be the proximity of the lens to the subject. So the closer you get to your subject, the shallower the depth of field becomes. The further away you are from your subject, the more depth of field you're going to gain. And the last factor that nobody really talks about, because it's already embedded in your device, is the size of the imaging sensor. So the larger the sensor in your camera, the shallower the depth of field you are going to have. So you have more control over those blurry backgrounds. I know we've all taken pictures with these things right here, your cell phone. Have you noticed that everything's usually in focus? And the reason is because a cell phone has an imaging sensor that it's about the space in between my fingers. They're very tiny. So the smaller the sensor, the more depth of field you're going to have. Couple that with a wide angle lens, everything's always going to be in focus. So anyway, the next thing you have to consider is movement, and that is controlled by your shutter speed. So in other words, if I am hand holding a camera in a lens, and if I had a couple of cups of coffee that morning, I'm going to be a little more shaky. So what you need to do is obviously be very aware of what your shutter speed is, because you don't want to introduce any movement or motion caused by you simply hand holding the camera lens. And I'll be honest with you, when I go to these places, I'm roaming around and I set up my tripod every once in a while, but not all the time. So I would say about 80% of the time I am hand holding the camera. So I am always very aware of what that shutter speed is. But I also do a few, tests before I go out there so that I know what those numbers really represent to me. And what I mean by that is that I do a test with my lens. And I'll, anytime we introduce a new lens, I'll mount it on the camera and I'll set my camera to shutter priority. And I will set the lens, usually a zoom lens, at different focal lengths. In other words, if I am using, let's pick on a lens here, the 70 to 200, for example, I'll set my the lens to 70 millimeters, and I'll set my shutter speed to about a 60th or a 90th of a second, somewhere around there. There's a rule of thumb that tells you that if you're hand holding a camera in a lens, that your shutter speed should equal that of your focal length. And that's a good rule of thumb. So that's why I kind of start there. So then I'll go ahead and set the shutter speed 60th of a second, 70 millimeter focal length, take the picture, and then, enlarge it in the screen, make sure it's nice and sharp. If it is, I'll slow it down. I'll go to a 50th, a 40th, a 30th, and see how slow I can really go with that particular lens in that situation. Then I'll increase my focal length 100 millimeters, and then I'll start at 125 and then slow down. So you get the picture. So now when I'm out there shooting, I set my aperture, and then I look at the shutter speed, and I make sure that that shutter speed is going to be fast enough to not introduce any movement. So anyway, that's the way I dissect it. And you've noticed that I've barely talked about the ISO. And that's because I always change that last. I always like to use the lowest ISO possible. In this particular case, 100th of a second, fast enough for me to handhold, f5.6, enough depth of field for the subject matter that I was, shooting, therefore 100 ISO. And usually that's the way I like to work it. So now, what are the settings on the camera? Well, it's very simple. I would say that a good portion of the time I am shooting in manual. Now, manual is great when your lighting is constant or controlled, when you can actually manipulate the lighting, and when you are using a lens that has a fixed aperture throughout its zoom range. So if you're using a zoom lens and that lens says f2.8, that means that as you zoom from one focal length or one extreme to the next, it's going to remain 2.8 throughout the range. And if the lighting is constant, manual exposure is perfect because, nothing's really going to change. Your exposure remains the same until you add or subtract light. So keep that in mind. Now, most of the time, like I said, I am actually running around, and I don't have a lot of time to really manipulate the exposure in manual mode. I really don't want to spend that much time with it. So what I do is I opt for a semi-automated mode, believe it or not. So if I'm up I'm up close and personal with my subject, and obviously depth of field is the most important thing for me, I set my camera to aperture priority. It allows me to select the desired aperture to give me the desired depth of field. The camera then in turn sets the shutter speed for me. And that's when I actually, take a look at what that shutter speed is all the time. Once again, to make sure that I can actually physically handhold that lens at that particular focal length. That's the way I usually like to work it. And because let's take a closer look at that manual setting, the manual exposure. Let's say that you are working the scene the way I like to do it. You walk around from one end to the other. As you do that, your exposure changes. So you're going to have to continuously make changes to either your aperture or your shutter speed or your ISO in the manual mode. In the semi-automated mode, once again, the camera is assisting and making some of those changes for you, yet allowing you full control over all of the other settings in the camera, which is, of course, very important. So let's talk about your location. Well, I like to do a little bit of research before I actually get out there. If I'm going to a public place and they do have a website or something, I like to get as much information as possible. Let's face it, locations come in different sizes, different shapes, and you can easily get overwhelmed if it's a very large, botanical garden, for example. There's, a few things to consider. Once you get there, look for a map. See if they have a map of the particular place. If you do your research, maybe they have a map online that you can download. Make things a little bit easier for you. The map will give you a nice layout of where certain things are and what you can expect. These are also great when you are doing other types of photography, like animal at the zoo, or wildlife or something like that, and an animal sanctuary. So anyway, these are great. It also allows you to see how far it is that you might have to walk, and that in turn will will basically dictate what it is that you're going to take with you. I do take a tripod, like I said. I do have one tripod that I like, and but it's quite large and heavy. So if I'm going to go to a botanical garden of this size, guess what? That guy's staying at home, and I'm going to pack a more comfortable or lighter tripod because you may be walking around for a while. So we decided that we were going to go to the Huntington Library, and this is what it looks like. And we did a little bit of research. There's all sorts of things to do. First of all, this is a sprawling 120-acre botanical garden. What we didn't know is that this was the largest independent research library. Who knew? Also, they have an art museum at this particular location. So quite a few things to do. On the website, you might learn that maybe perhaps they do have a source of food. Maybe you can buy some snacks there. If not, that's when you begin to plan your day. What am I going to take? How long am I going to be there? What time of day? What time do they open? What time do they close? Usually early morning. You'll find that there's going to be less crowds there, and the lighting, as you know, is probably going to be a lot better. So once again, a little research goes a long way. What type of, what time of year? I mean, I'm in Southern California, so we really don't have to think about that too much. But I know other parts of the country, you do have to take that into consideration. During these times, there may be some restrictions on what it is that you can take with you. So make sure you find all that out before you actually get there. Some places may and may not allow tripods. So once again, just do your research and make sure that you are prepared. They may have some areas that are restricted. Maybe they're doing something there and you can't get to it, and maybe there's a subject that you want to photograph at that particular spot. So you can plan for that, and that would mean just taking maybe perhaps a longer lens. So we decide early morning is probably the best time for us to get there. So we plan on that. Once again, less crowds. And it certainly did work out for us. So, another thing that we found is because of the lockdown, you did have to make a reservation to this particular place, and they were booked 2 weeks in advance. So once again, a little bit of planning will go a very long way. But once you get there, you are, or you will, or you may encounter some challenges. And the challenges that I've encountered, when I go to these places are pretty similar throughout. Now, you'll probably find your subjects that are clustered. They're grouped closely together. And that becomes challenging because your backgrounds are now going to be a little busy and a little distracting. We did encounter some closed off areas, some restricted areas. And then, of course, there's Mother Nature, and you really can't control that, but you can try to tame it a little bit. And what I mean by that, that's lighting and the wind. You really can't control the wind, but you can alleviate it just a little bit. So let's start with the most common, and that is a very busy background. So as you can see, I've got a subject here that I decided to take a picture of, but look at the background. You've got 4 different buds that haven't quite bloomed yet, but they're in my image. So what do? Well, I take a closer look, and then I said, well, let me go ahead and reposition myself and try to fix that. So you've got this guy here, and you got this guy here that I consider a little bit too much. The other 2 I can work with and I'm okay with. So by changing my position, I'm able to hide one behind my subject, and by taking a slightly higher angle, the other one is now out of the frame, giving you, in my opinion, a slightly better subject matter and a slightly better background. So then we come across this guy and we're taking pictures. The background was very busy. we really didn't have the ability to move around that much and try to hide things because there were just too many of them. So we walked around and went to the other side. And guess what? There was a big pot, a big red pot. So now that big red pot becomes our background. Uh, then we ran across this guy, and then, okay, so what do you do with something like this? Well, change your position and maybe perhaps uh, just get a little bit closer. Now, how close really depends on your lens. The ability of the lens to focus close really depends on the design, the manufacturer, so on and so forth. Each lens is going to be totally different. So make sure that you are familiar with your gear. And this is where you become familiar. You move in and you press the button to focus. And if you see that it's going back and forth, it's kind of sort of hunting, you're probably too close. Take, move back just a little bit and try it again. See if that goes away. Once it goes away, you'll find that you're within the lens's minimum focusing distance. The other way, of course, is to physically put it at the minimum focusing distance. And what you do is you switch the lens to manual focus. And then you turn the focus ring to the minimum, not to the infinity, that little infinity mark, the opposite direction. Go all the way to the lens, stops. And then you grab your camera lens without touching anything except your shutter release. You physically move in close until your subject is nice and sharp. Then you know that you are at the minimum focusing distance for that particular lens. Now, we did come across that restricted area. It was roped off and they were doing some repairs. They were changing out some of our subjects. So I saw this and I go, well, I can still take a picture of it. I did happen to take a long telephoto lens. In this case, I had a 150 to 600, and I was able to capture this from a good, what was it? Maybe 15, yards or so. So, that by checking beforehand, it basically told me, yeah, you may want to take a longer lens. Now, you don't have to physically have it with you. You can leave it in your car. You don't have to drag it out all day, drag it around all day. Just make sure you have it with you or handy so that you can actually get to it. So anyway, telephoto lenses sometimes can help you get out of a jam. Now, Mother Nature, yes, the wind, that is something that you will have to contend because even if the wind's blowing just a little bit, it might be enough to cause a blurry picture. In this particular case, wind was blowing, and I tried to do the best I could uh, to alleviate it. In other words, wind's blowing in a particular direction, and I try to stand in between the subject and the wind to try to block it and try to minimize it. Other things I do is I always take a light modifier with me. That is one of those round discs. I try to use it to block the wind from my subject. So use it kind of like a screen if that's possible. And if you are, photographing and you find that there's still a little bit too much movement, that's where your shutter speed comes in. Make sure that your shutter speed is at least a 2/50th of a second or faster so that you are able to freeze your subject. Now, once again, the faster, the better. Um, in this particular case, if you are using a semi-automated mode like I like to do, I'll switch my camera to shutter priority. Now I'm controlling movement with my shutter speed. Simply dial in the shutter speed that I want. The camera then in turn will select the aperture for me. But once again, I'm always aware of what that aperture is to make sure that I have enough depth of field to carry me through. The other challenge that you're going to encounter is, of course, lighting. And without, lighting, you're not gonna, your pictures are just, gonna be pictures instead of images. So I always try to look for the good light, look for the better light, and always use it to my advantage. And like I said, I do plan and anticipate that there are going to be some challenges. So I always take a light modifier, a reflector, and they do come in different sizes and different flavors. Some of them are 5-in-1. In other words, you have 4 of 5 choices. 6-in-1, 7-in-1. You're going to have, once again, a lot more choices. There are usually a silver side, a gold side, a combination of a silver and gold, which they call a soft gold, and those are great when you want to warm up your subject, and you want to make it look like you photographed that subject in early morning sun or late afternoon sun. Gives it that nice golden hue. You may find a white side to that reflector, and that reflects really not a large amount, but a smaller amount of much softer light. And then you'll have some maybe some colored sides to it, a green or a blue. Those are usually designed for when you want to drop your background out completely, isolate your subject because you're going to put something else after the fact. But there's always a center section, and that center section is usually translucent. That's the one that I use the most because that translucent section allows me to modify the light and make the light softer and reduce some of those shadows. But we'll get to that in a second. So what to bring with you? Well, you've done your research. You figured out where you're going to go, how much you may or may not walk, and how much you really want to carry. One thing is a nice, comfortable bag, camera bag. I like to take a backpack, and the reason is it leaves my hands free so that I am able to walk around. There may be some obstacles that you need to get around with, and by having both hands free makes things a lot easier. Now, I don't have one backpack. I've got 5 backpacks. So depending on the situation, that will determine which backpack I take. Some enable you to pack very large lenses. And of course, the bigger the bag, the heavier it's going to get because we tend to cram as much as possible into that. So then I have some smaller, medium, and then really small bags where I can carry one camera and maybe just 2 lenses. That's it. So consider that, next time you go out there. Now, what camera and lens to bring? Well, that really depends. I mean, if you have choices like I do, you can really sit down and dissect it and figure out what it is that you want to take and why. Is it going to be a DSLR? Is it going to be a DSLR with a crop sensor? Is it going to be a mirrorless camera? Many choices to consider. Filters, yes, circular polarizer might be a good thing. Maybe a monopod. You don't have a big tripod or a sturdy tripod. A monopod, if you don't want to carry that extra weight, is always a good backup. It does alleviate some of the weight when you're taking pictures and allows you to use slower shutter speeds. Are you going to be in very dark situations? Maybe an external flash, and of course, plenty of media. That is one thing that you should not do without because it's so inexpensive nowadays. It's not like the old days. I remember when I bought my first large memory card, 1 gig. Wow. But it was also like $300 plus, about $350. But nowadays they're so inexpensive. You can take quite a bit with you. So what's in my camera bag? Well, that once again depends on what type of research I did and what I determined was going to be a good fit for me for that location. I always try to take a small compact tripod, tabletop tripod. There may be some situations where I take that out and set up a subject, and those aren't very heavy and can get you out of a jam. I do like to take some artificial light and maybe perhaps not a flash, but maybe an LED. I like to get the LEDs that are, you can actually change the output. You can dial it up, dial it down. You can also change the color the color temperature of the light so that you have a lot more control over your image and not have to do a lot of work post. For this particular situation, I decided, okay, I'm going to take a camera and I'm going to take a mirrorless camera because of the size, because of the weight, and I was able to pack more lenses because of that. So there you go, water. Uh, and yeah, we did have to take some masks because we did have to remain covered. And like I said, being in Southern California, there's a particular type of weather that we encounter here, and that is hot, very hot, or stupidly hot. It really depends on the time of year. Very little rain, but you can always fix that. I do like to take a bottle with a spritzer because there may be some times that you want to take pictures right after a rainstorm. And if you know, can't wait for one, then you can create your own. So that's always handy to take. So how do you get started? Well, what we like to do is, you know, get some inspiration. And if you look online, look at different types of photography, just punch that in and start looking at some images and see what images you like, and maybe perhaps follow the photographer and see what type of work he does. That will hopefully inspire you and maybe perhaps give you an opportunity, to see if you want to replicate that type of work. Other places that you can look at, camera stores usually have a good amount of information on different types of photography. The corporate websites, Tamron has, the Image Masters, and those are professional photographers that are sponsored by Tamron. And you can look at different manufacturers' websites and maybe perhaps follow one of theirs. This happens to be one of ours, David Akubian, great nature and bird photographer. Janet, my counterpart, she did a little bit of research and she found the work from James Dempsey that was intriguing to her. So she decided, you know what, I'm going to see what he's got and then go out there and play with that images. So this is her take on his take. Once again, two different photographers, totally different subject matter. Are you really replicating? No, you're just kind of sort of taking a look of what they do and try to create your own. This is another one that she found interesting, and then she tried to go out and get something on her own, and this is what she got. Then I said, well, let me give that a try, and then that's the subject that I came up with. So as you can see, three totally different photographers, three totally different images. So don't feel bad that you are copying somebody's work. You're really not. You can certainly make that your own. Maybe perhaps you just simply want to go out there and get started on your own. So, if you do, just go out there, walk around first, camera in hand, of course, and find an interesting subject. Now, your choice in camera is going to matter, of course, because if you decide to take a camera that has a crop sensor, and let's clarify that a little bit. I know we're all pretty familiar with all this stuff, but just in case. Now, 35 millimeter film was the standard for many, many years, and everything in digital photography is always being referred to that standard. So the lens that you mount on a camera, depending on the size of the sensor, will determine what the focal length really is. So if you're using a camera that has an APS-C size sensor, that sensor is about 2.4 times smaller than a full frame. So you have a full frame, and now you're looking at a cropped in section of that full frame. What's happening is you're actually magnifying, you're kind of sort of zooming in on that particular, full frame. It's the crop factor, as we call it. Some cameras have a crop factor of some APS-C cameras have a crop factor of 1.5. In fact, most of them, but some cameras have a crop factor slightly smaller of 1.6. So Canon, DSLR, APS-C cameras have a crop factor of 1.6. Everyone else, Fuji, Nikon, Sony, some Pentax, Leica, those sensors are 1.5 crop factor. So what I'm trying to say here is that whatever lens you mount on those cameras, even if those lenses were designed for APS-C, multiplied by 1.5, that is going to give you the effective angle of view for that particular lens on that particular camera body. So if you mount a 100 millimeter lens on there, multiply that by 1.5, you get 150. That is your actual angle of view that you're using with that particular, with that particular device. So anyway, the way I like to photograph is I like to fill my frame as much as possible. Now, some of my colleagues are cropaholics, I call them. They'll shoot the subject, they'll get the lighting that they want, they will frame the subject the way they want, but they shoot it a little loose. They'll give it a little bit of room around the side. And because their thought is, I will bring this back into the computer and then I'm going to crop it the way I want. I'm the total opposite. I like to crop in camera because what I like to do is I like to future-proof my images. And what I mean by that is that if I do a lot of cropping, I may throw away a lot of data. This particular case, let's say we want to zoom in on this flower and really fill the frame with it. We are going to be cropping to about a 50% factor. In other words, we're going to be throwing away 50% of our data by cropping in that type. If I started with a 24 megapixel camera, guess what? I just threw away 12 megapixels and I'm stuck with 12. Is that a bad thing? Well, not really, but it depends on what you want to do with that image. Do you know what you want to do with the image a year from now? Maybe a year and a half from now, we're not sure. So that's why I always like to retain as much detail and information as possible. For example, if all I'm doing is doing a presentation on an HD screen like we have here, though that is a screen that has 1,920 lines of resolution going this way and 1,080 lines of resolution going this way. Multiply those two numbers, you get about 2.2 million. So all I really need is about 2 million pixels to show you an image on that type of screen. But as you know, technology advances and it improves and gets better. So years ago, they came out with 4K screens. Guess what? 4 times the resolution. Now you need 8 megapixels to show an image at full resolution on those types of screens. But once again, technology moves forward and now we have 8K screens. Guess what? 32 million pixels is what you need to show an image at full resolution on those types of screens. If you're going to make some prints, you're going to need a certain amount of data. A 4x6, about 3.5 million pixels, and 8x10, about 8 million pixels, and 11x14, about 11 or so million pixels is what you're going to need. So you get the point. The larger you're going to print, the more detail you're going to need, and so on and so forth. But once again, like I said, I always like to crop after the fact. Now, once again, the most important thing or part of photography is going to be the lighting. And I always like to look for the good light, the better light, and just try to improve my images from one to the next. So here we have front and direct light. So sunny day, light hitting the subject, in front. And as you can see, it's a little bit harsh. The shadows are really deep, but I always try to take a reflector with me and I am able to, make that particular type of lighting just a little bit better by diffusing it. So the diffuser goes in between my subject and the sun and gives me a slightly better light or a lot better light in some cases. Then you might encounter light in a shady place. Now, the diffusing part has already taken place in this particular type of lighting. It's very nice, very even, very soft light. Maybe perhaps, you walk around and you go to an area that has a covering. Maybe you're photographing under a canopy of trees. That's where you're going to find this type of lighting. Once again, nice and soft. Maybe perhaps you go on a day with a very overcast sky or slightly overcast sky. Now the entire sky becomes a big giant diffuser, diffusing the light nicely. I like to photograph in these conditions because there's very little work that I need to do, while photographing at these places. Then you're going to run into some backlight. Now, this is a bright sunny afternoon again, but now the light is behind your subject and in front of you. By simply moving from right to left, you can turn that backlight into sidelight, and it becomes just a little more interesting, in my opinion. And then, of course, you've got the hours with the good light, the golden hours, as we call them, early morning, late afternoon. The light is a little bit warmer, and you can take that and work that to your advantage. You can go from here to here. So you go from backlit to front lit, and you can change that completely. Now, every once in a while, you could encounter some very nice pockets of light, and and those are very nice to use as well. And these are few and far between, but this happens when you are in a situation where there are, a lot of trees or a lot of covering. So try to use those to your advantage. I've got a little hiccup here. I'm going to fix it. Give me 1 second, please. My computer here that I have my my notes on just gave me a blank screen. So there we go. So when I go to these places, I like to get close. I really like to work my image and get as close as possible. Sorry about that. There we go. Now, the closer you are able to get to your subject, the minimum focusing distance of the lens, the larger the subject is going to appear. So for the most part, lenses that give you that macro capability will usually get you at least a 1:4 reproduction ratio. And what that means is that the subject that you are photographing will appear about a quarter of his physical life size. Now, a lot of the Tamron lenses usually get a little bit closer than that, and a lot of them give you a 1:3 reproduction ratio. So now your subject will appear about a third of its physical size that it will on the sensor. There are some Tamron lenses, some prime lenses that will get you even closer. They will give you a 1:2 reproduction ratio. So the subject is half its life size on the sensor. And with a little bit of help on those on those close focusing distance lenses, or with a macro lens, you can actually get to a 1:1 reproduction ratio. And that basically is the subject is going to be rendered full size or life size onto the sensor. So with that in mind, I always opt for a lens that gives me a very good minimum focusing distance, just so that I can control how large my subject is going to appear. So I walk around, I find what I think is an interesting subject. We have a plant here with some water down in that leaf that hasn't fully opened. And it looked interesting because it was being backlit by the light and causing it to kind of glow green. So found it, started working it, and got a little bit closer. And as you can see, depth of field diminishes rather quickly, and everything that is not in focus is just tone and texture, which you can use to your advantage. Always thinking about the image, work your composition a little bit, try to fix it, and there you go. I'm always using the rule of thirds, and in fact, I put it on my screen in the camera. So rule of thirds is simply dividing the screen into 3 different sections, horizontally and vertically. And you try to put your subject close to one of those intersecting lines. It makes for a really good composition. Another thing I do is when I'm photographing, I am scanning my viewfinder. I'm not just looking through it. I am really scanning at everything, because that when you're photographing, helps you find some things that maybe perhaps you don't want to photograph. So I'm taking pictures of this particular flower here. And yes, there's something that I catch when I scan the viewfinder, and I simply don't want to have it in my image. So I change my position. I just, recompose a little bit and get that out of the way. And there you go. Once again, always looking at the subject and, making sure there are no, obstructions, some unwanted things there. And I do that by what I like to call working the scene. So get to the place, have my camera, and get my camera settings ready, walk around, find a subject that I might think it's interesting. And then I basically take pictures and walk around the subject in different angles. I may take a higher angle, a lower angle, walk around to one side, walk around to the other side. This is right in front of the subject. Now, as I'm doing that, I am always looking at the exposure because it does change. It could be slightly, or it could be quite dramatic when you go from one side to the other. There is a full stop of change in the exposure. So if I'm taking, if my camera settings are in manual, I got to be very aware of that. So there is more light in one, from one angle to the next. So you may have to either open up or close down your aperture. And what are you doing? You are changing your depth of field. Or you could change your shutter speed, and you could go from a one shutter speed. But if you have to slow it down, you then have to consider, is that, am I on a tripod? Am I hand holding? And is that fast enough for me to physically hand hold that? If not, then we think about the ISO and changing that. So a higher ISO is going to give you the ability to select a faster shutter speed or to select a smaller aperture. And that's the way you work, the exposure thing. So found my subject, walked around, fixed my exposure from one shot to the next. My intent was always, okay, when I saw this subject, was to desaturate this after the fact. I shoot in RAW. I don't shoot in black and white. I shoot it in color because it's easy to desaturate the image in the computer. If you shoot it in black and white in a JPEG manner, guess what? It's black and white. Good luck trying to put the color back. Those are reasons I always shoot in RAW, because I have full control over the image after the fact. And I can always, desaturate after the fact if that is my intent. Now, when I'm out there and I'm working the scene, I may find something that I think it's interesting. So I may try new things with that particular subject. A while back, my neighbor had this vine, and it was overgrown and coming over my yard, but it had some very interesting flowers. It was an overcast morning, and the colors were really flat, but I wanted to punch up the colors just a little bit. So I got an LED flashlight, and I simply turned it on and then held it from behind this particular flower, giving it this nice little glow and intensifying the colors just a little bit. But once again, always looking to improve the image. So then I took my little spritzer bottle, and then I added a few drops from behind, changed my composition a little bit, and there you go. Working the scene, just trying to make things better from one image to the next. A few years back, I was in Alaska. I was there to do a couple of workshops for Tamron. And one of the things that I wanted to do is I wanted to photograph some bald eagles out in nature. So I did my research, and I found that at this park, during these hours, you usually found some bald eagles there. Went there, walked around for an hour and a half. Guess what? No bald eagles. So did I pack it up and go back to the hotel? No, it was just after a rainstorm, and in the parking lot, I started walking around, camera in hand, and I found this particular subject, which I thought was very interesting. Raindrops on this particular leaf just happened to kind of sit there and dance there. A nice little clear pearls is what I saw, But anyway, uh, always make, lemonade with those lemons that nature gives you. And of course, Southern California doesn't give us a lot of rain, but with that spritzer bottle, concentrated it on one spot, became a nice little big drop, and uh, use that always to your advantage. Try something else. Maybe perhaps you want to try the um, uh, minimalistic abstract, or find a subject, give a little backlight, whether it be natural or artificial, get up and close and try to make abstracts of your own. Take that abstract, desaturate it after the fact, and see what you can get. And there's always going to be other things to photograph at these places, so be prepared. Take a nice long telephoto lens with a very fast aperture, so you're able to blur the backgrounds. Remember, use that all of those factors that contribute to depth of field to your advantage. Telephoto lens, large aperture, enables you to blur the backgrounds, to give you some nice, interesting subjects that are just kind of, buzzing around or hanging in there. Get up close, get a lens that has a good minimum focusing distance. Maybe perhaps you have a little bit of time, or you have a garden in your backyard. Walk around with a nice, lens. Or in this particular case, I was shooting pictures for another class. I like to call that class Beyond Macro. So we go beyond that 1-to-1 reproduction ratio, and now we go in the opposite direction. We go 2-to-1. So 2 times larger than life size, 3-to-1, so on and so forth. That requires some accessories, and it requires a little bit more work, but fun to do if you have the time. And if you do it in your own backyard, it's makes things easier. Telephoto lenses, of course, allow you to photograph subjects that are a little bit skittish. You can photograph them from a nice distance. Maybe perhaps there's a theme going on at that botanical garden that you can take advantage of and do some, shots of that. Maybe you go at a particular time of year and there's something else going on. So, October, Halloween, they did have some decorations that, we decided to shoot those and make some images, with those. Shoot some lights. It's all about having fun. Because, if you go out there and you work too hard at this, you are going to get frustrated. I just like to take the camera and start shooting, maybe perhaps a macro landscape, or do some still life at home. I've got this big piece of frosted glass, and put the subject in front of it, shoot right through it, change the lighting, play with it as much as you will. I love doing black and white, and I'm always looking of shades of a particular color. Shades of green in this particular case, I know it's going to give you a nice black and white because there's just a lot to go with it. And I'm always looking at the subject in a different way. So this particular subject I came across, I decided, okay, well, I'm already thinking this is going to be a black and white. So I want to add as much grain as possible, and use a higher ISO, so on and so forth. Again, all this is done after the fact, but I am thinking about what it is that I want to do with that image after I've shot it. So, any questions?
So let's go down the line. Oh, this is a good one. So the first one I saw was, do you use photo stacking for any of your images?
All these images that you saw, no photo stacking. Photo stacking is an excellent technique, but I think it has a particular place. I come from a lens manufacturer, as you can see, so we try to photograph things naturally without, with very little manipulation, and that would in turn give you a lot of depth of field that one particular lens cannot give you at any given point in time, no matter how small that aperture becomes when you are that close. It's a fun technique to play with, however. I have tried it, I have played with it, and it does have its place. I know photographers that will stack 100+ images. They work, in ridiculous amount of distance. They are using microscopes and that kind of thing. I had no idea. This one photographer was showing me some of his images. I had no idea that spiders had different size ports for the web because they were different thicknesses. That's how close he's getting to these subjects. So anyway.
I have somebody asking if you use a clap. I guess I'm not familiar with that.
A clamp, maybe?
It might be a clamp.
Yes, I do take I like to call it my helping hands. You might find a subject that's maybe perhaps, during the spring, some flowers tend to get heavy and they droop in the wrong direction. A clamp, a little helping hand, you can bring it back and reposition it to where it is that you want. Very handy to use, definitely. And I do have those and I do use them. But I always, I come from a photojournalistic background. I studied photojournalism in college. If I do any of that, I always say that that is what I did. That was not its natural position. I did, manipulate it into a better composition or whatever it is. But yeah, I hope that was clamps.
Yeah, it probably was. Also, what is the difference between pictures and images?
Well, to me, a picture is just something you pick up a camera and you're just clicking around. You're not really doing a lot of thinking about what the image actually is. To me, an image is something that you are really spending some time in thinking about. You're thinking about the exposure. You're thinking about all of the aspects. You're thinking about the composition. Once you start throwing all that into it, in my opinion, that becomes an image.
Good answer. Do you use a tilt shift lens?
I used to with the other manufacturers because they made one. Tamron does not make one, so I do not use one, but I have used those in the past.
Wonderful. Assuming we are not focus stacking, what is acceptable for how much around the subject is out of focus?
Well, guess what? That is for you to determine because it is your image that you're creating. And the whole answer here is what is acceptable to you? How much of the subject do you want to see? Or do you want to show and convey to your, to your viewers? Generally, as a rule of thumb, I like to start at around f8, f11, and just kind of give me an idea as to what's happening there. And then I'll work it from there, maybe less, maybe more, depending on the proximity of the subject to the lens.
So let me see. Look at the. Oh, also, do you use back button focus with macro, or do you manually focus? I think that's a good question. Do you back button or maybe in some cases manually focus that lens?
Right. You'll find that, you saw most of my images and they were really close of the subjects. Cameras, autofocus systems usually have a tough time focusing that close. They spent too much time hunting. The autofocus points, the autofocus sensors might miss the exact spot that I want to focus on, and they're going to hunt just a little bit. I like to do it manually in most cases because I have full control. If I'm using a lens that has the window on there and it gives you the reproduction factor, I will select it and then I will physically move in close until I get the part of the subject that I want in focus. My camera is usually in continuous shooting, however, because as I'm moving in, I'm pressing the button, taking 3 or 4 pictures. That will give me a choice of different focusing planes, which will in fact change my depth of field. Now I've got 3 or 4 pictures to select from.
That's good. Yeah. Well, in especially with mirrorless cameras, they have focus peaking. You can make sure those red lines or whatever color you set up, can be in focus where you need it to be. I found that pretty useful. I know this is subject matter for a different class that you teach on the Beyond Macro. But real quick, what are some accessories you use to enhance your macro to a 3-to-1?
The easiest one to do is extension tubes. Now, extension tubes are fairly inexpensive. I think the most expensive ones I've seen about $100, and you'll get about 2 or 3 of them depending on the camera that you're going to mount them. And now they come with contacts so that they will relay the information from the lens all the way to the camera. So it makes it just like if you're using a lens without anything. The advantage of that is that you can stack those. You can use 1, you can use 2, you can use all 3 if you bought 3, and it will get you even closer to your subject. So that is what I usually go to the first time, depending on the lens and how close I want to get. If I want to experiment a little more, I might use a reversing ring. This allows you to take your lens and mount it backwards onto your camera. Everything's manual at that point, but you'll find it very interesting. The depth of field changes. There's less, and it's totally different way to work. But some lenses that don't focus close, you can change it, you can reverse it, and they will focus close when you go from the opposite end. Unlike binoculars, you take a pair of binoculars and you flip them, everything looks further away. The lenses work in reverse, everything's closer. The other thing that I do, but this is when I have a lot of time to play with, and I'm on a control situation, I'm on a tripod, I'm on a focusing rail, I'll use a bellows. And this will give you an infinite amount of extension, basically. It's like a little accordion, and you make it as big, the bigger you are, the closer you are going to get to your subject. That requires a little bit of setup and a lot more patience to do, but you can get 4-to-1 ratios, you can get, 4 times life size, you can get really close.
This is a good question. How do you handle wind and breezes?
Well, I'll do several things and maybe combine some of those as well. I will stand in between the subject and the direction of the wind, and hopefully my body will block some of that wind. I will maybe perhaps wait for a little calming moment, because it'll blow for a while and then it'll relax. Take my pictures then, and then if it starts up again, stop. Or I'll use that light reflector and put it in a position where it's blocking the wind for me. If I'm taking a tripod, I'll lean it against the tripod, and the tripod is now holding that reflector for me. So try to use as much as possible.
Wonderful. When you select a subject, how many different positions and images do you capture on average, I guess, in your workflow?
If I'm working the scene, I'll probably end up with maybe 50 or 60 different images, somewhere around there. That tells me that I'm doing an adequate job of working the scene. If I take 2 or 3 pictures, it simply tells me that subject matter isn't really interesting, and what am I doing? When I'm really concentrating, I'll take maybe 10 in one position, change the angle, lower, just different things. So 50 to 60 images tells me that okay, I'm working it a little bit.
Also, what LED lights do you use in the field? Field of indoor, yeah.
Yeah, I like to use the little light panels. There are different manufacturers. Luma Cube, I believe, makes one. Photix makes another. There's quite a few of them out there. The reason I like those is that they are the size of approximately a cell phone. So it's a nice little area. They are, you can change the power from 5% all the way to 100%. And you can also change the color temperature. Usually they go down to about 32 or 3400 K, and you can elevate them to about 5600 K, making them very versatile. The particular one I have also doubles as a battery pack. So if my phone does get a little bit low, guess what? I've got an external pack there with me. So those are usually the ones I like. They also have a tripod port. So that's where my little top tripod comes in handy. I can mount the light on there, place that tripod anywhere and just help illuminate my subject. So
Yeah, and we have a lot of the ProMaster and Godox ones that are about this big, which is perfect for that size of subject matter, because you don't need a big, huge softbox for a flower. But we have the ProMaster and the Godox ones on our website, as well as in our brick and mortar stores if you happen to be near any of those. I have a few more questions. This is an interesting one. When you're using the spritz bottle, do you put any glycerin in the water? I know some people use that for product.
yeah, no, go I go to the natural, just water, because I don't want to, this is somebody else's garden. I'm just a guest. So I don't want to do anything to harm or do, to any of their subjects. So no, just water.
Good.
If you have one that you can change the amount of the spritz, that's probably going to work better for you, because you can start with a very small mist and then just kind of build it up. Otherwise, if you can't control that, you might put too much on there and then you have to, fix that. So I opt for one of those bottles instead.
And let's see, do you change your white balance in the field, or do you do that in post?
I change it in the field. I try to get my images as close as possible in the field. I don't like spending a lot of time behind the computer. So the closer I get, the better it is for me. So yeah, I'm always looking at that.
Susan has an SLR lens from Tamron. It's an 85 to 210 macro zoom lens with a screw thread mount from the late 1970s.
Oh.
And they're wondering if that old Tamron lens can be used on a modern day DSLR.
It can be, but it's going to be completely manual. But you're going to have to, it's a screw mount. So you're going to have to get an adapter that will enable you to go from screw mount to whatever mount camera that you're using it on. So if it's an Nikon, it's an F mount. If it's a Canon, it could be an EOS mount, or it could be even an older mount than that. I know Canon's changed their mount several times. So that's probably in the same era as their manual focusing lenses. Do you remember what that mount was?
For which brand again?
The Canon, the manual focus.
They have the FD. I think that's the one.
Yeah, they have, right, correct. The FD mount. So it might be one of those. So, you're going to have to do a little bit of research and find to see if there's an adapter that will enable you to do that.
What Tamron lenses do you recommend for an Olympus Micro Four Thirds mirrorless for macro? I didn't know if you guys had any Micro Four Thirds macro lenses.
No, we do make a Micro Four Thirds lens. That's a 14 to 150. It's an all-in-one. It has a pretty decent minimum working distance, but it's more of an all-purpose walk around travel type of lens. Not really designed for close focus. But remember, you can take any lens that you have and just simply add a set of extension tubes. And now you've got a macro. It'll get you, with enough extension, it'll get you to a 1-to-1 reproduction ratio. So, and macro lenses can be expensive if you're really not going to do a lot of it, or you're thinking, I want to dabble and play with it, see if I like it first. Extension tubes, you're always going to have them. And you can use them in different situations, not just macro, but it's a very inexpensive way to go. About $100, like I said, versus about $400, $500, $600 for a macro lens, or maybe even higher depending on the mount.
Excellent. Oh, this is a good one. I guess in terms of following rules and being respectful of these plants that are not yours. Cameron says, do you ask before spraying the flowers with water?
If I'm in a botanical garden, it's a big sprawling place. Who do you ask? And it's water. So I find that, if I'm not adding any other type of chemical, I think I just go ahead and, spritz. If there are a lot of people there, I may, mention to them that that's what I'm going to do. Make sure that everybody's, especially if they're taking pictures, make sure we're all in the same boat. And maybe they want to participate as well. But if I'm walking around by myself, no, I'll just go ahead and spritz. Otherwise, I will, do the other.
It's a good point. Suzanne was wondering if there is a magnifier that can be attached to the live view screen that's going to keep the details and not distort them. Yes, Suzanne,
Yeah.
I know there are some. I haven't seen any. I haven't researched this a lot recently because I know a lot of these cameras have a like a magnifying function on as a button, but I don't know. Armando, do you know of any?
Yeah, there used to be some devices out there that basically it was, if you remember the film days and the slides, kind of like a loop, and you put it on the back of the screen, you can get in there. I haven't seen those in a while, and like you said, because now manufacturers enable you to just simply magnify that particular part, the screen. Let's see,
I think Hoodman was one of them.
Hoodman made one, and there was another company that made them. I can't really remember, but yeah, you can look for the Hoodman, and you'll probably still find them out there.
Yeah, Suzanne, I would Google just LCD screen magnifiers. There's a few companies that still make those, and they actually work really well. I've been surprised because they're literally just a magnifying glass, for the same size as your screen.
Yeah, and their particular purpose was actually to block the stray light, so you can actually see the screen. Because in bright sunlight, as you can see, it's very difficult. This would actually block the light, so you can actually get a very good idea of what's there.
This is a good one. This may be our last one. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. What settings do you use to get a black background?
What settings do I use to get a black background? Okay, so if you're in a situation where you want to diminish, well, first of all, let's make sure that there's not a lot of light hitting your background to begin with, because otherwise it's going to be a little bit difficult. But the smaller the apertures, you'll find that the background will tend to go a little bit darker in those situations. The faster shutter speeds, the exposure combination will enable you to do so. Now, the only time I really use this is if I'm doing a silhouette, for example. I will use that particular concept. For what you're doing, what you may want to do is look at the brightest point of the light hitting your subject. So if you have a flower with a lot of background, what is the brightest part, and expose for that? Set your exposure to mimic that. And if the light hitting the background is less, it's going to go dark. So that's really honestly a loaded question, because you have to look at the situation first before you can make certain determinations. But if I were in a situation like I just mentioned and I saw that, that's the way I would approach it.
And I'm just thinking off the top of my head, another good way would be to use maybe one of those small reflectors, flip it around the other way, and then just kind of flag that light past where the flower is. So that might darken your background a little bit more. That's the only thing I can think of.
Exactly. Yeah, because the reflector, usually has a black side and is designed specifically for that. So you can diminish light or reduce light from a certain area.
Well, all right. I don't see any other questions at the moment, so I guess we'll go ahead and cut it off from here, let everybody go about their day. I do want to let everyone know, well, first of all, thank you so much for attending this class. So this is Armando and I have really appreciated your attendance and the time out of your day. I know Tamron does have some sales going on. I'm not sure if any of those are on the macro side, but I know there are various different lenses on their sale that they're going on, I think this week or through the weekend. But feel free to check us out on the website for all those different deals. We have a banner on bedfords.com, BEDFORDS. I know we had some people internationally, but unfortunately, this does apply to United States only, so I do apologize for that. But if you are interested in any of the lenses that were shown in the data at the bottom, check out our website, and you'll see maybe some cool deals that may apply to you. So Armando, we appreciate you very much. Always a pleasure to see you.
Thank you.
And hopefully we'll see you in person as things get a little bit better.
Yes, definitely.
And to everybody else, go out and enjoy the beautiful nature that's out near you. So, and feel free to tag Bedford in your photos. We'd love to see what you're able to come up with. And also Tamron.
Yeah. Have some fun.
Have a great day, everyone.